Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here. We're fortunate to have a terrific panel on a very important and timely topic. The topic is Judaism and Zionism and the connection between them. It's a topic that's very popular today, and so we're very glad to have here Alicia from the American Zionist movement and Ofir Dayan from the Student Support Israel at Columbia University. So we'll have a very meaningful conversation. I'll start off with the sources, the more basics, the Tanakh, and a bit of the Talmud, and then we'll sort of move into the more modern discussion, and we'll follow it up by Q&A, so that if you have anything that comes to your mind, feel free to hold on to that thought, and we'll have open Q&A at the end. So if you don't have a source sheet, we have a source sheet here, and it starts with First, I'll start off with a story, because how can a rabbi not start off with a story? So, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs once was meeting with an Iranian cleric, and the cleric told him, you guys have such a beautiful religion, and it's so universally appealing to so many people, and you have so many practices, and so many ethics, and so many morals. And so why is it that you guys need a land? Because you have so much about your religion that it's not just limited to a land. So why this hang up with a land? And so that's the question that we're addressing tonight. And the answer is that there's no other people in the world whose birth is connected to a land as much as the Jewish people. So the second we are introduced to Abraham in the Bible, source 1, Vayomer Hashem el Avram, Lech lecha me'artzecha u'mimoladetecha u'mibeit avicha el ha'aretz asher areka. God speaks to Abraham and says, leave the land in which you are now and go to another land, a land that I'll show you. And he later on tells him, Vayira Hashem el Avram, Vayomer lezaracha eten et ha'aretz azot. So part and parcel of our religion is the connection to the land of Israel. And that promise that's said to Abraham, I spared you on the source sheet because there are literally hundreds of references to the promise of the land to Israel, where the promise is repeated generation after generation, that you people are going to be a people, and that's strongly connected to having a land. So source 2 is God speaking to Isaac, V'yiten lecha et birkat Avraham lecha u'lezaracha itach. God will give you the blessing of Abraham, l'rishtecha et eretz megurecha, that you will inherit the land you're living in, asher natan Elokim la'Avraham. So the land is promised, and the patriarchs settle in the land. The next example is the connection of a Jew to the land when a Jew is in exile. So who's the first Jew that's sort of really living in an exile? Well, Abraham visits, but the first Jew in exile is Joseph. Joseph is in the palace of Pharaoh, and he lives there, and he comes to the end of his life, and he realizes that he's never going to return back to the land of Israel. And that hurts him. So source 3, Vayomer Yosef el Echav. Joseph tells his brothers, Anochi met, I'm about to die. Ve'elokim pakod yifkod etchem, ve'ela etchem min ha'aretz azot el ha'aretz asher nishba la'Avram le'Yitzchak u'Yaakov. I'm about to die, but one day you people are going to return to the land God promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Vayashba Yosef et bnei Yisrael lemor. Joseph makes the children of Israel swear, pakod yifkod elokim etchem va'alitem et atzmotai mizeh. Even though I won't be able to return to the land in my life, please make sure that you return my remains, my body, to the land of Israel whenever it is that you come back. So that's an example of Jews, no matter where they were, even when they were in exile, had this yearning for the land, even if they knew that that yearning will not be fulfilled in their own lifetime. And I can't help but remember a video that surfaced recently of Jews who were in a concentration camp or in the ghettos, and they have these videos of them singing Hatikva. So no matter how desperate Jews were, and even when they knew that they may not make it to that land, they always yearned to return to that land. And so when the Jewish people go from being a family to being a nation, that's in source 4, Vayomer Hashem, God first speaks to Moses, and he says, Ra'o ra'iti et oni ami asher b'Mitzrayim ve'et tzakatam shamati mipnei nogsav. I have heard the call of the Jewish people. I see their suffering in Egypt. Ki yadati et machovav, I know his pain. Va'ered la'atzilo miyad Mitzrayim, I will come down and save them from the Egyptians. La'aloto min ha'aretz el eretz tova rechava, I will bring them from there to a good and plentiful land. El eretz zavat chalav udvash, we're first introduced to the famous land of milk and honey. God says to Moses, I will bring them to a land of milk and honey. And then dozens and dozens of times in the Chumash, all the discussion, if you think about it, as much as the Bible contains the 10 Commandments, it's peppered throughout the Bible, throughout the 5 books of Moses, is the goal. What's the goal? The goal is you are going to the land of Israel. So it's through Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. It's all about the ultimate goal, which is the land of Israel. And so throughout the prophets as well, the Jewish people live in Israel, and then when it seems like they're going to go into exile, God says that I'm going to return you. I'm just going to skip a second to source 6. V'shavti et shavutam Yisrael. Even after the exile, even after the Jewish people who have lived by now in the land of Israel for more than 1,000 years, huge amount of time, even when they go into exile, God says, V'shavti et shavutam Yisrael. I will return the Jewish people to Israel. Ubanu arim neshamot. They will rebuild forsaken cities. V'yashavu v'natu kramim v'shatu et yinam. They will plant vineyards and drink their wine. V'asu ganot v'achlu et priyam. They will plant gardens. Unetatim al admatam. I'll plant them on their land. V'lo yinatshu od ma'al admatam asher natati lahem amar Hashem Elokecha. They will not be sent off their land which they were given. Source 7 is a fascinating source because it is addressing this question that the Iranian cleric asked. The Kuzari, which is a book of dialogue, it's a work of fiction. Rabbi Yehuda Levi is having a conversation with who was the king of Kuzar, a king who did actually convert. And he tells him, I didn't quote this, but it starts off, the king is asking him, you guys have a great religion, why a land? What's the point of a land? You're doing great with your religion. And then the response is that from Adam HaRishon, every single prophecy that we have has to take place in the land of Israel. Every single prophecy is either in the land of Israel or regarding the return to Israel. And so he says, all prophecy, all spiritual communication is all for the sake of Israel or taking place in Israel. And so the land is not only a land where Jews can find shelter, but it's a spiritual land. And this is something that's sort of seen as a moral imperative. So if you go back to source 5, it's from the book of Joel, which is a somewhat neglected book. It's in the 12 minor prophets, who are not minor, it's just the books are small. V'kibatzti et kol hagoyim, I will gather all the nations. V'oradetim el emek Yehoshaphat, I will take them to the valley of Yehoshaphat. V'nishpateti imam al amni ve'al nachalati Yisrael, I will judge them for what they did to my people Israel. Asher pizru b'goyim ve'et artzi chileku, I will judge the nations of the world for expelling the Jews from their land and for dividing the land of Israel. Source 8 is interesting textually, but even more so historically. It was written by Rabbi Meir of Rothenburg, who lived in the 1200s in Germany, and is known for having died in prison. He died in prison, and the Jewish community wanted to pay a large sum of money to redeem him from prison, but he said that the law in the Talmud is that if someone is being extorted, if someone is asking for a very high price to redeem someone, you are not allowed to pay them, because then it's just going to cause more kidnapping. So he actually died for keeping this principle. He was one of the most famous rabbis in Ashkenaz, and he was willing to die for not to violate this principle. What was his crime? Why was he arrested? Well, the king of Germany decided he wants the Jews to stay there, and this rabbi led a movement to try and escape to Israel, and he broke the law by trying to go to Israel, and he was arrested and died in prison for that, for trying to have the Jews come to Israel. So if you think about it, here's a man who lived 700-800 years ago. He tried to leave Germany, and he was arrested by the king then in Germany for trying to lead Jews out of Germany. So the historical meaning of that is kind of profound, especially saying that here, which is a synagogue of Jews who came here after the Holocaust. So Jews were trying to leave Germany for some time, and then the Germans asked them to stay. So that's all about the connection of the Jewish people to Israel. All this is true until 1948. Since 1948, I would argue that things changed. Why? Up to 1948, the argument around Zionism was idealistic. Should Jews live in the land of Israel? And people said, well, we have all these sources, let's go to Israel. And that's true. After 1948, and especially today, when you have more than half of the Jewish people, I think is it a majority of Jews living in Israel? Yeah, when you have a majority of the Jewish people living in Israel, it goes beyond the discussion of the land per se, but there's a responsibility for the largest Jewish community in the world. It doesn't matter what your position is on Zionism. If you can't stand and support the largest community in the world when it's in time of need, then that goes far beyond the issue of Zionism. And that's source 10 from Maimonides. If a person is able to help and save another person, and they don't, then it's a violation of lo ta'amod al dam recha. Do not stand by idly as your friend's blood is being spilled. And so another imperative that I would say the Zionist movement introduced in a beautiful way that Jews did not really experience for 1800 years is the principle of Kol Yisrael Arivim Zel Hazeh. Yes, Jews throughout the centuries helped each other, but it was before we were sort of a global community. Jews here helped the Jews there. It wasn't as large scale as before. And so today when you have the Zionist movement, it's not just about the return to the land of Israel, but it's also about mutual responsibility for each other, and that's a beautiful religious concept that many secular Jews, in a way, understood better than religious Jews, and have advocated and worked for it in a really remarkable and beautiful way. So without further ado, I will pass it on to Ofir.
So I will briefly introduce myself, what I do. No, it's fine. Whatever you prefer. Okay, I can go there, but I'm short, so I don't know. I think the podium is going to hide me. Okay. So.
Or just, yeah.
I'll stand here. So I'm going to introduce myself briefly, what I do, and how it relates to what Rabbi was speaking about. So my name is Ofir Dayan. I, as you can probably hear, am Israeli. I moved here 2 years ago to study at Columbia University. And I'm now the president of Students Supporting Israel here at Columbia. We experience a lot what the Rabbi was speaking about. This notion of why do you need a land? This is something we encounter a lot. Many people talk to us about Israel and about why the Jewish people needs to be there. And all these sources are accurate and good and explains our connection to the land of Israel. At the end of the day, my answer is that Judaism is not a religion. It is also a religion, but it's not just a religion. Being Jewish means belonging to a people, belonging to a nation of people who, for the past 4,000 years, had a common goal, common history, yes, also common religion, common practices. And this is why we need to go back there, because everything we did for the past 4,000 years had to do with that land. And in Passover, when we said next year in Jerusalem, it was not Jerusalem, Ohio, which I think there is, because there are a few Jerusalems here in the United States. And when grooms in the most intimate moment of their wedding said, if I forget you Jerusalem, they did not mean any other Jerusalem in the world. They meant specifically Zion, Jerusalem, Israel. And this is my answer to all these people who are trying to say that Judaism is a religion and that's it. And like Christianity or like Islam, it has nothing to do with a specific land. I don't know whose it is. And another difference that I think it's important for all of us to understand when we're speaking about a Jewish state, so they say, okay, so Jews can go back to the land of Israel, that's completely fine, but why do you need a Jewish state? And that's the essence of Zionism. Why do you need a Jewish state? Why not just a state where Jews can live? Because unlike Christianity and Islam, which are religions, Judaism is a community, is a nation of people which is not establishing a sovereign state somewhere in the world that it has connections to. It is re-establishing an already pre-existing sovereignty that was there in that specific land. And this should be our answer to all these people that cannot understand the difference between Israel and why it shouldn't be like a Christian state, although that we are all aware that there are many Christian states and many Muslim states. And I feel like this specific point is something that we encounter a lot. Rabbi spoke about Iranian clerics, and we encounter in Colombia not from a religious point of view, not from someone who's religious and needs to understand a different religion or community. We encounter it a lot, unfortunately, from the far left of the American society. Colombia, is here in New York City, a city that is more left-leaning, which is absolutely fine. My organization is not a partisan organization, so we have people from the left and from the right. We're not a Jewish organization, so Jews and non-Jews who are working together. But at the same time, Colombia specifically became a hub for extreme left anti-Israel and anti-Semitic activity, which is something we need to tie back to these things. We need to understand when someone on Colombia's campus tells us that Jews have no connection to Israel, they're not saying, well, they should have a state for all its citizens. They're saying Palestine from the river to the sea. And if you look at the map, I'm sure there is somewhere here, from the river to the sea, it's the entire land. It's not seeking to live in coexistence, a Palestinian state and an Israeli state. This is not what they're saying. They're saying eliminating any Jewish state in that area. And I'm sure that we can all understand here, if you're eliminating a Jewish state in that area, you're eliminating any Jewish presence in that area. Because in a state that is not going to be Jewish in that area, it is not very likely to allow religious freedom for Jews. So that's one thing. And I want to speak for a few minutes before I'll conclude about what we do at Columbia and how we do it. Because talking about these issues in a deeply secular campus is a complicated issue. Most people, when you tell them, because God said so, that doesn't work. They don't care about it. They don't connect to that language. It's just not what they understand. And we have to understand that in 2019 at Columbia University, we cannot use that language. We need to talk in the language these students and faculty understand. And I feel like the Jewish people and the story of the Jewish people fits exactly everything these people understand. Because when they talk about indigenous peoples, I don't think there is a better example of indigenous population, not one better example than the Jewish people. So when I talk about the story of Judaism and Zionism in Colombia, I will say, because, I have this book and it says that, it belongs to me. I say, look, you have here an indigenous population that was rooted by what we would now in 2019 call colonial powers, was uprooted from its homeland, taking for almost 2,000 years of murder, genocide, discrimination, persecution, and after 2,000 years managed to liberate itself and go back to its homeland. I don't know anything that is more progressive or more liberal than that cause. I just don't. And by the way, I think this And this achievement that Zionism managed to achieve, it's the only, or let's say the most successful national liberation movement ever. And as such, it has a huge responsibility towards other minorities. And this is why we try to host many events with, for example, Kurds or Native Americans and other minority groups who have not yet achieved this kind of national liberation, whether it be independence or just being able to practice the way they want to. But we need to understand that as Zionists, we have a moral obligation towards these people to help them and to guide them to the same thing, but at the same time, not be so carried away that we forget why we do it. Because we do it to preserve a Jewish homeland in the land of Israel. I will now pass it on to Alicia, and then if you have any questions, I would love to answer them.
So, Alicia Post. I was born and raised in a pretty diverse community on Long Island, if you can believe that. And growing up, if you were Jewish, most people went to Jewish day school. And so I went to public school, and I'll never forget in the beginning of class, one of the first days of school, they said, everyone stand up, say your name, and say where you come from. And so Angelo stood up and said he was Italian, and Natalia stood up and said she was Puerto Rican, and I stood up and I said, I'm Ukrainian, Romanian, Prussian, an Eastern European Jewish mutt. And people yelled, Jewish is a religion, you idiot, you know? And so now when somebody says, where do you come from, where are your people from, I say, I'm Judean. And so fast forward a couple years, I took my first trip to Israel. It was a Poland-Israel pilgrimage, and landing in Israel was one of the most pivotal moments of my life. It was the old airport, and I literally went down and kissed the land of Israel. And I'll never forget my green JanSport backpack hitting the back of my head, and I face planted into the ground of Israel. And I got up with tears in my eyes, and I was crying, and I said, am I hurt? What's going on? And I realized that for the first time in my life, I made sense. I was home. This is where I come from. This is where my people come from. And it really connected. So I went to college. I majored in sociology of family relationships, sociology of gender. I just knew I wanted to make the world a better place, and I wasn't quite sure how I'd do it. And my family was taking a trip to Israel, a 10-day trip, and they said, you should come. I said, all right, well, I can't look for a job. No problem, I'll come on this trip, you know. And while I was there, I did some soul searching. And I said, you know, I'm gonna come home and find something meaningful. And the day I landed, a family friend called me and told me about an opening at a brand new organization called Birthright Israel. So the rest is history. Fast forward 2 decades later. For the past few years, I've been working as the program director of the American Zionist Movement. The AZM is an umbrella organization comprised of 32 national Jewish Zionist organizations and works across a broad ideological, political, and religious spectrum, linking American Jews and the community together in support of Israel, Zionism, and the Jewish people. AZM is the U.S. Zionist Federation in the World Zionist Organization, the WZF. So Zionism, the movement of the Jewish people to establish a secure national homeland, Eretz Israel, the land of Israel, where Jewish history and culture have consistently unfolded for thousands of years. Israel is the accumulation of the Zionist dream rooted in the Torah. It is modern, thriving democracy in the heart of an ancient Middle East where citizens enjoy freedom of religion and freedom of expression. So Zionism, the national liberation of the Jewish people. Modern Zionism emerged in the late 19th century, and in part was a reaction to a new wave of anti-Semitism rather. Anti-Semitism is anti-Zionism, absolutely, and that's a point I'm about to make, so thank you. Well, arguably, one cannot study Zionism without studying Herzl, as we call him, Theodor Benjamin Ze'ev Herzl. Although he wasn't a religious guy, he did call for the first Zionist Congress, or conference, held in 1897. That was 121 or 122 years ago. It was a major event in the establishment of the modern state of Israel. We often refer to it as the parliament of the Jewish people. And since then, about every 5 years, we hold a World Zionist Congress. And in 2020, you will have the opportunity to once again voice your vote. And I'll give a little plug for the American Zionist Movement. If you would like to get involved and learn how to vote, go to zionistvote.org to learn more. So in speaking here tonight, I researched the synagogue a little bit, and I thought it was very interesting. The synagogue was founded in 1941, and the original congregation comprised of 61 refugees from Luxembourg who escaped Nazi occupation under extraordinary circumstances. And, it led me to think about how many say that the Holocaust would not have happened should there have been a state of Israel, and that it was spawned in part because of that. But we all know that it actually was long before that Zionism existed, and that in part that it did happen due to the rise of anti-Semitism in Europe that we all know is continuing today. And here we're facing the same Jew hatred in the form that anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism is becoming normalized. In fact, a couple months ago I was on the train and I gave somebody my card because I talk to everyone. And she turned to me immediately and she said, "Oh, you shouldn't use that word Zionist." And I said, "Oh, no, that's why I'm proudly a Zionist, you know?" And so I found it really interesting that here, you know, you feel uncomfortable. Here in 2019 in New York City is a place where you should whisper Zionism, you know? So Israel Forever Foundation is one of the member organizations of the AZM, and I came across an interesting article when doing some research, and it was called Anti-Zionism is the New Anti-Semitism. The language has changed. Jew has replaced the term Zionist or colonialist. The backstory has changed. Now it is Israel the aggressor, Israel who does to the Palestinians what the Nazi did to the Jews. When suddenly it makes it possible and even acceptable to compare Jews to the Nazis. The imagery has changed from that of the Shylock Jew to the cruel IDF soldier who abuses Palestinian children. It's easy to recognize that the content is the same and that the only difference is the packaging. But mostly the goals are the same. Anti-Zionism denies Jews the right to self-determination in their ancestral homeland, Zion. And to clarify, criticism of Israel and the policies is not illegitimate. That it's not just anti-Zionism to criticize Israel's existence. It is when you criticize Israel's existence. It's not if you talk about the policies. But when you call for Israel as illegitimate, then anti-Zionism is saying that Israel should cease to exist. And it is both anti-Zionist and anti-Semitic. I apologize, I got a little lost. I will just say that it was one other article I did want to mention, Israel is the only Jewish majority country in the world, a homeland and a haven for Jews in the aftermath of the Holocaust. So you can criticize the policy of the Israeli government, but if you deny its right to exist, then you inescapably are an anti-Semite. One other article to reference was by Ambassador Michael Oren in defense of Zionism. This is basically showing that there is hope and it's not all just negative, that here we are facing on a daily basis criticism and critique and having to defend our right. I mean, Ofir does it firsthand every day, and I'm sure as a rabbi in the community, here you are explaining to people and trying to defend, and in fact there are many rabbis on many pulpits that can't discuss Israel, and that in and of itself is a challenge. So in Michael Oren's article, he says, by just about any international criteria, Israel is not only successful, but flourishing. The population is annually rated among the happiest, healthiest, and most educated in the world. He goes on to say unemployment is low, it's a global leader in innovation, home to hundreds of R&D companies, and not to mention the beaches, the music, and of course the food. In a region that's reeling with ethnic strife and religious bloodshed, Zionism has engendered a multi-ethnic, multiracial, and religious diverse society. Arabs serve in the IDF and the Knesset and Supreme Court, and while Christian communities in the Middle East are steadily eradicating, Israel continues to grow. In view of all these monumental achievements, one would think Zionism would be admired. I mean, as Ofir mentioned, how much more progressive can you be? About 1/5 of Israel's population isn't Jewish, and there are many that are patriotic. And of course, the issue of Judea and Samaria, which many refer to as the West Bank. An area used twice to launch wars, and many Zionists would insist that these territories represent the cradle of Jewish civilization and must by right be settled. Others warn that the continued rule over the area erodes Israel's moral foundation and will eventually lead to force between being Jewish and remaining democratic, which is quite a scary thought. So basically last year my organization, the American Zionist Movement, as I mentioned, 32 organizations, and we really go from far right to far left. We go from the Meretz Party to the Likud Party and even further and everything in between. We do all come together, and we have agreed last year on a statement of principles of Zionism, and included in that statement is the Jerusalem program. The Jerusalem program is accepted by all. It's the global statement of the beliefs of the Zionist movement, it is the successor to the Basel program from 1897 that was adopted at that first Zionist Congress by Theodor Herzl. So in conclusion, I'm just going to read the first line, and there are copies of the statement of principles on the source sheet, and I've left full copies of the principles, and of course you can go to the website or reach out to me. But Zionism, the national liberation movement of the Jewish people, brought about the establishment of the State of Israel and views a Jewish, Zionist, democratic, and secure State of Israel to be the expression of the common responsibility of the Jewish people for its continuity and future.